Long before anyone called him King Kalen Veyron, he learned to distrust the smiles of the royal court. Every morning, noble families arrived at the palace carrying gifts, proposals, and carefully rehearsed compliments. Their daughters admired his handsome face, but their eyes always drifted toward the gold insignia on his coat. Kalen had begun to wonder whether anyone would remain beside him if the crown disappeared. His father, King Aldrin, considered the concern childish. "You are not meant to be loved like an ordinary man," the king told him. "You are meant to rule." Kalen said nothing, but the words settled heavily in his heart. That night, he summoned his closest friend, Captain Darian Holt, and revealed a reckless plan. He would abandon his royal identity and enter the palace guard under a false name. For several months, he would live as a poor soldier with patched clothing, empty pockets, and no family name worth mentioning. Darian stared at him in disbelief. "If the court discovers this, your enemies will call you foolish." "Perhaps they should," Kalen replied. "But I would rather be called foolish than spend my life wondering whether anyone loved me or merely loved my crown." By sunrise, Prince Kalen had disappeared. In his place stood Aaron Vale, an ordinary palace guard with worn boots, a faded uniform, and roughened hands. Only Darian and the king knew the truth. Aaron's first days were humiliating. He scrubbed corridors, carried heavy crates, slept in a cramped barracks, and ate coarse bread beside men who never imagined they were sharing a table with their future king. Then he met Morel Arden. She worked in the palace gardens and treated servants who could not afford physicians. She possessed neither wealth nor noble connections, yet she carried herself with a quiet dignity that unsettled Aaron. He first noticed her when a kitchen maid accidentally shattered a silver serving tray. Lord Varric Sorn, the palace steward, seized the frightened girl by the wrist. "You useless little fool." He raised his hand. Morel stepped between them. "Don't." Varric glared at her. "Move." She made a mistake. She broke royal property. She can repay it. With what? Morel looked at the trembling servant. With her wages. Varric laughed coldly. Her wages would take years. Then give her years. The courtyard fell silent. Varric's expression hardened. "You are forgetting your position." "No," Morel answered. "I'm remembering yours." Aaron felt something stir inside him. She had no sword, no title, and no protection, yet she had stood against a powerful man simply because someone weaker needed help. Varric finally released the servant, but his eyes remained fixed on Morel. "This is not finished." After he left, Morel knelt beside the frightened girl and gathered the broken pieces. Aaron approached. "You should be careful." Morel glanced up. "About what?" "People like Varric." She smiled faintly. "Being careful doesn't mean watching someone suffer." Those words stayed with Aaron. That evening, he secretly left a small pouch of coins outside the maid's room. The next morning, Morel found him in the garden. "You gave her money." Aaron stiffened. "She needed it. And you thought I wouldn't know? I didn't do it for praise." "Good." She handed him the pouch. "I don't want charity." "It isn't charity." "Then what is it?" Aaron looked toward the servant quarters. "Kindness." Morel studied him for a moment before returning the coins. "Then keep some for yourself. You look like you need it too." For the first time in years, Kalen laughed without thinking about how a prince was supposed to behave. Morel smiled at the sound. Neither realized that someone was watching them from the palace window. Lord Varric had already noticed the strange new guard. And he had noticed something more dangerous. Morel possessed a sealed letter left by her late father, a physician who had discovered that powerful nobles were secretly stealing money from the royal treasury. Varric needed that letter destroyed. If Morel refused to surrender it, he intended to silence her permanently. And before the night was over, Aaron would discover that his disguise had placed him closer to danger than he had ever imagined. For several weeks, Aaron Vale had lived among the palace guards without anyone suspecting that he was Prince Kalen Veyron. He had discovered that poverty demanded a different kind of courage. There were no servants to carry his burden, no gold to soften mistakes, and no title to command respect. Yet every day, he felt increasingly certain that the disguise had given him something the palace never could, the freedom to see people as they truly were. And the person he watched most was Morel Arden. She had become his closest companion, although neither had spoken openly about the growing affection between them. Their conversations in the garden were brief but meaningful, and Aaron had begun to look forward to every moment when her warm smile erased the loneliness he had carried for years. But Lord Varick had not forgotten the confrontation in the courtyard. He began questioning servants about Morel's movements. He learned that she visited the abandoned physician's quarters several times each week and suspected she was hiding something there. One evening, Aaron found Morel leaving the old medical wing with a small leather case pressed against her chest. "What's inside?" he asked. She stopped. "Something that belonged to my father." "Is it dangerous?" "To the wrong people." Her answer immediately changed his expression. Morel opened the case and revealed a sealed letter. "My father discovered that several nobles were stealing money from the royal treasury. He planned to expose them, but he died before he could." Aaron's heart tightened. "Do you know who was responsible?" She shook her head. "I know one name. Varick." Her silence confirmed it. Aaron wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to reveal his identity, place royal guards around her, and order Varick arrested before he could touch her. Instead, he forced himself to remain Aaron Vale. "If Varick knows about the letter, you're in danger." "I know." "Then give it to me." Morel stepped back. "No. I can protect it. I don't doubt your courage. But this belongs to my father. If I surrender it, the truth could disappear." Aaron understood. "You're right." She smiled faintly. "That may be the first time you've admitted it." He almost laughed, but footsteps echoed beyond the corridor. They extinguished the lamp. A moment later, Varick's voice sounded outside. "Search every room." Morel's breathing quickened. Aaron quietly drew his dagger. The door opened. 2 guards entered. Aaron struck the first before he could shout. Morel grabbed a fallen lantern and smashed it against the floor, plunging the room into darkness. They escaped through a narrow passage behind the medicine shelves. But Varick had anticipated the rout. A guard waited at the other end. Aaron pushed Morel behind him and fought. The struggle was short but vicious. He disarmed one man, yet another struck him across the ribs. Pain exploded through his side. Morel seized a heavy iron instrument and struck the attacker from behind. They ran again. They reached an underground chamber and found an unexpected prisoner chained against the wall. The wounded man lifted his head. "Aaron Vale." Aaron froze. The stranger's eyes narrowed. "I know who you really are." Morel stared at Aaron. Before he could respond, the prisoner whispered, "Your Highness." Silence filled the chamber. Morel slowly turned toward him. "Your Highness." Aaron could no longer hide. He removed the worn guard's badge from his uniform and looked directly at her. "My name is Kalen." Her face drained of color. "You're the prince." "Yes." "Then why did you lie to me?" "Because I needed to know whether anyone could care about the man beneath the crown." Morel's eyes filled with hurt. "And did you learn?" Kalen stepped toward her. "I learned that I would rather lose the crown than lose you." Before she could answer, the prisoner suddenly pulled against his chains. "Stop talking," he warned. "Varick is coming." Then the underground doors began to shake. Someone was forcing them open. Kalen reached for his sword. Morel clutched the letter. And from the other side came Varick's cold voice. "Your Highness, it is time for your little disguise to end." The underground doors shook violently beneath Varick's assault. Kalen drew his sword while Morel stepped behind him, clutching her father's letter against her chest. The wounded prisoner watched them with grim determination. "There is another way out," he whispered. "Behind the wall." Kalen examined the stonework and found a concealed latch. A section of the wall shifted, revealing a narrow passage descending into darkness. "Can you walk?" Kalen asked. The prisoner nodded. Morel moved toward him. I'll help. Kaelin looked at her, surprised by her instinct to rescue a stranger even while danger surrounded them. Together, they supported the wounded man through the passage. Behind them, the underground door splintered. Varric entered moments later. They cannot escape, he said. But Kaelin, Morel, and the prisoner emerged beneath the palace chapel. The prisoner collapsed. Kaelin removed his cloak and pressed it against the man's wound. Who are you? The man struggled for breath. My name is Garan Thorn. I served your father as a royal investigator. Kaelin's expression hardened. What happened? I discovered Varric's conspiracy. He intercepted my reports, murdered witnesses, and imprisoned anyone who knew the truth. Morel opened her father's letter. Then this proves everything. Garan shook his head. Not enough. Varric controls half the palace guard. If the king dies tonight, he will claim the throne belongs to a council he controls. Kaelin's face went pale. My father. He started toward the royal chambers. Morel caught his arm. You cannot go alone. I have to. No. Kaelin turned. You don't understand. If something happens to him, I understand perfectly. Her voice softened. You spent weeks pretending to be powerless because you wanted to know whether people would stand beside you. Now you finally have your answer. Kaelin looked around. Garan was wounded but standing. Morel was beside him. And from the chapel doorway came Captain Darian Holt with a handful of loyal guards. We heard everything, Darian said. Kaelin exhaled. Then we end this tonight. They moved through the palace passages while flames began spreading through the western wing. Varric's men had started the coup early. When Kaelin reached the royal chamber, he found his father unconscious and 2 assassins standing over him. Kaelin attacked without hesitation. The first assassin lunged. Kaelin deflected the blade and struck him down. The second raised his sword, but Darian intercepted him. Morel rushed to the king. He's alive. Kaelin knelt beside his father. 4 years, he had believed his father's expectations were the source of his unhappiness. Now, seeing him helpless, Kaelin realized how deeply he still loved him. Then a terrible sound echoed through the palace. A bell. Once. Twice. 3 times. Darian looked toward the window. That's the alarm. Outside, the palace courtyard had erupted into chaos. Varric's soldiers had locked the gates and surrounded the royal family. Kaelin stood. Get my father to safety. And you. I'll stop Varric. Morel stepped forward. So will I. Kaelin shook his head. No. She met his gaze. You don't get to decide whether I stand beside you. Before he could answer, an arrow shattered the window. Morel pulled him aside. The arrow struck the wall exactly where his head had been. Kaelin stared at her. She gave him a trembling smile. Still think I need protecting? He laughed despite the danger. No. They reached the courtyard together. Varric stood on the palace steps with armed men surrounding him. You should have remained a poor guard, he called. Kaelin removed the worn guard's badge from his uniform and dropped it onto the stone. I did. He drew his sword. And it taught me what you forgot. Varric sneered. What? Kaelin looked at the servants, guards, gardeners, and workers gathering behind him. That a kingdom belongs to its people. One by one, ordinary palace workers stepped forward. The cook carried an iron pan. The stable-master held a wooden staff. The gardeners gripped shovels. The loyal guards raised their swords. Morel stood beside Kaelin. Varric suddenly understood that his greatest mistake had not been underestimating the prince. It had been underestimating the people the prince had learned to serve. But before the first battle began, a horn sounded beyond the palace gates. Everyone turned. An enormous royal army was approaching. At its front rode King Aldrin himself. He was pale and weak, but alive. He raised his sword toward Varric. Your rebellion ends now. Varric's confidence vanished. Yet he still had one final weapon. He seized Morel from behind and pressed a dagger against her throat. Kaelin froze. Varric smiled. "Drop your sword, your highness." Kaelin lowered it. Morel looked directly into his eyes. And then, without warning, she whispered the words that changed everything. "Trust me." She stepped backward, straight toward the open flames behind her. The flames roared behind Morel as she stepped backward, exactly as she had promised. Varric's smile disappeared. "What are you doing?" Morel suddenly dropped beneath his arm and drove her elbow into his ribs. The dagger slipped from his hand. Kaelin lunged forward, caught Morel around the waist, and pulled her away from the flames just as Varric stumbled backward. Darien and the loyal guards seized him. For several seconds, nobody moved. Kaelin held Morel tightly. "You could have died." She looked up at him, breathless. "I knew you would catch me." "That is not an excuse." "It worked." Despite the smoke, Kaelin laughed. Then Varric shouted, "You think this changes anything? The treasury belongs to me. The nobles will never accept a king who disguised himself as a common guard." Kaelin turned toward him. "They will accept a king who protects them." Varric was dragged away. The palace fell silent. King Aldrin was carried into the courtyard, weak but conscious. He looked at his son in the worn uniform he had used during his disguise. "You finally understand," the king said. "Understand what?" "A crown is not a privilege." The king placed a trembling hand on Kaelin's shoulder. "It is a promise." Kaelin looked toward Morel. For the first time, he knew exactly what kind of king he wanted to become. The following weeks transformed Validria. Varric's conspiracy was exposed. The stolen treasury funds were recovered, and every noble involved in the plot was brought before the royal court. Garan Thorne's testimony and Morel's father's letter revealed the truth that had been buried for years. But Kaelin refused to celebrate. Instead, he spent his days repairing what the corrupt nobles had damaged. He ordered grain released to struggling families. He opened the palace physician's doors to servants. He restored wages that had been stolen and dismissed officials who had abused their authority. Morel worked beside him. Their relationship changed slowly. She still teased him when he became too serious. He still pretended to be offended when she criticized his decisions. But now there was no disguise between them. One evening, Kaelin found Morel in the garden where they had first met. "You've been avoiding me," she said. "I've been preparing something." "That sounds dangerous." "It might be." He took her hand. "I want you to leave the palace with me." She stared at him. "Leave?" "To a new hospital outside the capital." She smiled. "I thought you were going to propose." "I am." Her smile vanished. Kaelin laughed. "I wanted to frighten you first." He knelt. "No crown, no court, and no political agreement brought me to you. I came as a poor guard because I wanted someone to love the man beneath the title." He opened a small wooden box. Inside was not a magnificent diamond, but a simple silver ring. "Morel Arden, will you marry me?" Tears filled her eyes. "Yes." The kingdom expected a lavish royal wedding. Instead, Kaelin and Morel chose a ceremony in the palace garden, surrounded by the servants, soldiers, gardeners, and ordinary citizens who had stood beside them during the rebellion. But just before the ceremony began, King Aldrin made an unexpected announcement. He placed the royal crown in Kaelin's hands. "I will not wait another year." The crowd fell silent. "Today, my son becomes king." Kaelin looked stunned. Then the king turned toward Morel. "And today, the woman who protected my son when she believed him to be nobody becomes his queen." Morel's eyes widened. Kaelin whispered, "You knew." She shook her head. "Not at all." They laughed. Moments later, the crown rested upon Kaelin's head. But he did something no previous king of Validria had done. He removed it. He placed it gently into Morel's hands. "This belongs to both of us." The crowd erupted in applause. Years passed, and the kingdom flourished. The hospital Morel dreamed of became the finest healing center in Valedria. Poor children received treatment without payment, elderly servants were given homes, and no palace worker was ever again punished for a simple mistake. One spring morning, Queen Morel discovered a small wooden box waiting beneath the ancient garden tree. Inside were the old boots Kalin had worn during his disguise. She laughed when she saw them. "You kept these." Kalin smiled. "They remind me of the greatest mistake I ever made." "Pretending to be poor?" "No." He took her hand. "Thinking I needed to hide my crown to discover true love." Morel leaned against him. "And what did you discover?" Kalin looked across the kingdom, then back at the woman who had once shared bread with a nameless guard. That the greatest treasure a king can possess is someone who would love him even if he had nothing. Their children soon joined them beneath the tree, laughing as the palace bells rang across the valley. And from that day forward, Kalin never again measured his worth by the crown upon his head. He measured it by the lives he could protect, the kindness he could give, and the woman who had loved him before she ever knew he was a king. The poor guard had searched for true love. Unexpectedly, he had found a queen. And together, they built a kingdom where no one had to be rich, powerful, or important to deserve kindness.